Mm-hmm. Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ.
Good Lord. Well, if I wasn't awake before, I'm awake now. Oof. Mm-mm-mm. Uh. Mm-hmm. And I feel the scowl, the sort of. I can feel it in my face. Hmm. Yeah, it just kind of feels like I'm in that energy of trying to find something to. Well, there's two. It's trying to find something to find, like trying to find something interesting, or like trying to find what feels interesting to me. And then it also feels like just kind of clearing out. It feels a little tired. It feels a little like I'm not in this because I feel like it's fun right now. I'm not in this because I feel curious. I'm in this because I feel, honestly, even a little bit of annoyance that I have so many emails back, like piling up. And I feel like I want to find something interesting, but it's not really there. So I'm just kind of reading it and like having this like scowly face because it's like, I don't really care right now. Like, I just don't really care. Um, but I want to. There's like a part of me that wants to care, and I just don't. And this is kind of, this is where I feel a conflict within myself. I feel conflict within myself. I feel like I don't really know what's going on. I don't really know what's happening. I don't really know why I'm doing anything I'm doing right now. I don't really feel like anything I'm doing is really meaningful. It's kind of one of those like, see, now I'm feeling really like sleepy. Really just like, ugh. Let me just say that I'm not saying fuck it. I'm just saying now is not the time. There is interest in these topics. There's interest in what these emails express, what the newsletters express, what is being expressed, what is being shared. There is interest there. It just does not feel like now is the time to delve into them because that curiosity is not quite where I feel it how do I express this? I feel like I'm not really expressing what I want to express, and I'm just going to delete this. So goodbye. Good morning. Okay. Today we're going to go right into it. Oh my gosh. Excuse me. Interesting. That's not where I was going. Oh no. Okay. Origin. Damn. Oh. Okay, so we're just gonna let's try that. Experimentation. Wow. Scalia famously said the Constitution is not a living document. It's dead, dead, dead. Wow. That's really interesting. Okay. Yeah, see, originalism deliberately overemphasizes a particular version of history. That bookend. Inclusive constitutionalism. It's just kind of interesting to think about how in recognizing the sort of inherent limitations of really narrow interpretive lenses being used, so to speak, to read text and to decipher meaning. It's interesting to take that and look at our own lives and how we interpret our own lives, how we interpret the environmental cues, how we interpret the cues of what it is to be alive, and in a way kind of just using the same, I say argument, but I don't mean it in a sense of like conflict. I really just mean it in supporting a perception, encouraging a perception, and advocating for that perception. And so taking that advocacy, taking that belief, and applying that to how we perceive ourselves. How do we perceive ourselves in the context of a theory of originalism? How would we perceive ourselves differently in the perception, in the interpretation of, or in the theory of inclusive constitutionalism? How would that would anything shift? What would shift in how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to each other, how we relate to the environment, how we relate to social institutions? How would any of that change, if at all? And I would be curious to observe how often this sort of originalistic theory is applied in our everyday lives. And that's not to say that the theory of originalism is wrong and bad in an absolutist sense. It's just to question what lies beyond that theory, what else exists as a means of interpretation of the same experience. How else can I look at this without feeling so attached to this theory of originalism as the be-all end-all, as a hierarchical authority in how I relate to myself and the world? And that's also not to say that inclusive constitutionalism gets that hierarchical authority. Then it's not like hierarchical authority shifts from one to the other. It's just, and I think that's kind of sort of the point of inclusive being used here as a descriptor. Is inclusive is not necessarily equated with a hierarchical system. That's also not to say that hierarchy is per se wrong and bad either. Just to really notice how we structure the relationships that we have, and the way that we sort of read and adhere to them. And a tyrant. I just want to quickly, I just want to reference this other article I found because I wanted to see if I could find further information on that Justice Scalia quote about the Constitution being dead, dead, dead. I wanted to see really where that came from. Was it a case? Was it an interview? Turns out, at least from what I can find, that it was from I actually don't know if it was a lecture, a graduation speech, but it was given, the speech by Scalia, the talk was given at the Southern Methodist University, I believe perhaps sometime in 2013. Interestingly, I cannot find any video recordings from that speech slash talk. Perhaps it was private, I'm not sure. So I kind of find that interesting. I looked on YouTube, I Googled it, and there's very little information. But what I did find is this interesting article. Dallas Morning News editor plays brilliant game of email dodgeball. So it's just, it's striking to me that there is this quote. It's not a living document. It's dead, dead, dead. A question about how an acontextual quotation, which I found really interesting in this article, the usage of this framing, acontextual quotation that reminds me of the segmenting, so parsing out of a bigger picture framing to bigger picture context to specifically found as the soil. It's like, anyway, I just found this, but then it goes on to say the full quote, according to this person. Now, there's no more quote unquote evidence to say one way or the other whether this particular fuller quote is what was stated. I used to say that the Constitution is not a living document. It's dead, dead, dead. But I've gotten better. I no longer say that. The truth is that the Constitution is not one that morphs. It's an enduring Constitution, not a changing Constitution. That is what I've meant when I've said that the Constitution is dead. So I don't necessarily intend to say one way or the other whether Justice Scalia, in expressing this perception, I don't have any intention of saying that this expression is right or wrong, good or bad. It really, to me, speaks to a larger, interesting phenomenon, where pieces of material, pieces of substance, so to speak, are specifically highlighted as proof, as evidence, as the foundation upon which to build a vision for just a vision that someone holds to be true. And it's just, I'm not saying that that vision is incorrect. I mean, I guess the question is, can everything be perceived as acontextual? I don't even know where I'm going with this, really, but it just is striking me that such specific aspects of a larger picture can be the foundation upon which the life of a vision, a truth, so to speak, grows and bears its own fruits. I mean, how does that feel? I ask myself, how does that feel? And there's something about it that feels unwholly, holy as in WHOLLY. There's something that feels unwholly satisfying. And so it's almost as though I can't help but want to observe that larger picture. Not just this segmented reality, so to speak, but this reality integrated within a bigger picture. Now, what that bigger picture is a continuous ripple effect where there's this picture, then this picture, then this picture, then this picture, not even in a linear sequential sense necessarily. It's all entangled in this quantum reality that is so interwovenly connected. And So in interpretation and meaning and value of reality, of one's reality, of reality, if I can even say reality in general, it's just this constant sort of zooming into the specifics and then zooming out to question what perhaps is the larger picture and exploring that together in a more sort of holistic sense. And even the specifics of this in its more robust expression, the whole paragraph here, is within the context of a larger speech. So it's not that this paragraph, because there is just, I imagine, I mean, I suppose I could say it's an assumption that it was in a larger speech. But taking that aside for a moment, if I just assume that this is in a larger speech, even taking this more robust paragraph, it's with an understanding that there is a larger picture here, and to simply just focus on this particular segmented aspect to then use as a seed to grow a further sort of reality upon this alone feels unholy to me. And yet in saying that, what's coming through is that there's still so much fruit in this segment. So it's like there's this robust, abundant fruit born from this seed already. It's not that the seed has to be nurtured and cultivated and grown to then bear more fruit, although that potential exists. It's just interesting to kind of listen to the fruit born from it currently. Perhaps the fruit born from it, it bears those seeds to then, be cultivated and nurtured in a continual sort of emergence. But I suppose to specifically go to this segmented seed and look at it only as what's coming through is to not acknowledge. So I'll just go with that, to not acknowledge the process of how it's being cultivated, how it's being grown, what the motivation is for that cultivation. And there's something about that that feels artificial to me. There's something about that that feels manipulative, but in a quality that's disingenuous and very strategized. And again, that's not to say that, this quality of manipulation and strategy is bad per se and wrong per se. It's just, it has a different quality to it, sort of in juxtaposition with that kind of natural outcropping where there is just this natural sort of cultivation of seeds born through the natural emergence and unfoldment process already in existence. And so I suppose, in a way, when you look at the Constitution in that way, as I was just saying about this paragraph, even like this segmented through interpretation, it's this seed that has grown, so to speak. It is bearing fruit. And to simply just continue to recycle those same seeds over and over and over and over, it's actually not even recycling them. It's not even growing those seeds. In the originalist theory, it's really not even growing those seeds. It's kind of taking the seeds that are born, and this is an extreme analogy, but sort of just throwing them in the trash. And yet organically there are these seeds being produced that, what if they were cultivated organically? And by organically, again, I mean sort of just let to express, just let to be realized.
And as you and I speak, it's May 31st, so the book has not.
It's kind of, what's standing out to me is this, how constitutional law is geared specifically toward governmental, the government's relationship with the public, that it is supposedly the leader of. Constitutional, the Constitution is and was created to limit the authority of the governmental institutions and how those institutions impacted, influenced, reached into the lives of the public. So it's just kind of interesting to me how even in exploring the interpretive lenses through which to perceive the constitutional landscape is to see and perceive the how the lenses through which we interpret the authority of these governing bodies. And so often that translates into personal rights and private rights, and how what constitutional interpretation means in relationship to, in regard to, within the context of the private life. And so they're two sides of the same coin, but I'm just finding it interesting how when we talk about the interpretation of the Constitution, we're talking about the interpretation of the authority of governing bodies. And it's slightly odd to me that the judicial, specifically the Supreme Court, who has been perceived as having this supreme authority over constitutional interpretation, how this governing body with perceived supreme authority is that which interprets its own authority. And that is fine, that's okay. I'm not saying that there is something in, I'm not saying that that is wrong and bad. I'm not saying that it's right and good. It's just, it sort of mirrors the desire that individuals have to express authority, interpretive authority of their own lives. So the authority to interpret their own experiences and how that shapes them, how that shapes them in their reality, how they I don't know, there's just something about how it's all so insulated in the sense of it is its own body. I don't know why it struck me. It just did. And it there's so much controversy. There's so much I don't know what I'm trying to get at. And maybe this is the process I go through, and for some reason I'm like looking for myself to get to the point. I'm looking for myself to get to the point rather quickly when historically the experience has been when contemplating, sometimes contemplation is, it's a process that can be ongoing for upwards of an hour. Sometimes it's not that long, but I find myself looking for me to get to the point. And I don't intend to rush this process. So there is this frustration that I feel in the perception that I'm not getting to a point, but in a way that's not really even what contemplation is about for me. It's not about necessarily getting to a point. It's more about just simply exploring what feels interesting in that moment and exploring how I relate to that information. And oftentimes, in that experience, there is sort of an expression that emerges that feels as though it is the point, or it is the heart of what I'm exploring. It's the heart of what I'm sort of gravitating around. But that's not always the case. It's just a matter of allowing myself to speak about whatever is coming out, whatever is landing with me, inquiring about it within myself, especially when there is a perception speaking the loudest that perhaps feels in conflict with this information. And that tension, that edge, sort of the edges kind of rubbing up against each other, can be confusing, can appear confusing, can appear nonsensical, can appear, the word obfuscate is coming through, like it can appear obfuscated. And it can appear as though there isn't a point. And so I notice the frustration, I acknowledge it, and it's okay. It's okay to be frustrated. I understand why I would feel frustrated. There is a tendency to, there's a tendency in our culture for immediate gratification, for direct, clearly sort of articulated information that can then be applied immediately and used to solve a perceived problem, or to just complete a perceived task. And that's not really what I feel like this is about. This isn't really about that per se. I'm not saying that that wouldn't be like a natural byproduct. But just allowing what wants to emerge and acknowledge the frustration, acknowledge perhaps even some criticism that's coming forth from within myself, and to just feel it, to just sit in it, take a deep breath in it, and be open to the information that emerges. And so going back to what I was saying, there's something interesting to me about how the interpretation of constitutional information, so to speak, the constitutional framework and how that's applied. It's interesting how the interpretation thereof is synonymous with the interpretation of the governing body's authority. This, in a way, actually is kind of reminding me of, I was thinking about the other day in reading about AI and Bitcoin and even with digital twins. There was an example given in the book I was reading about the potential for all these uses for AI, all these technological uses that basically outsource so much of our lives in a way that it really started to feel as though this example, this potential, was literally like taking the Monopoly game and using the Monopoly game to authorize or to, how does this want a word? It almost just felt like if you were to take the Monopoly game and say, okay, I'm going to rely on this game in totality for how I experience reality. And I'm not really sure this is coming across the way it feels to me, but it really is externalizing reality in a way that makes reality feel like it is purely a game. And I know that that is often said, but this landed with me. These potential examples landed with me in such a way that it really didn't, feel like I'm using this word a lot, but it felt so unreal. So yesterday I felt this gravitation toward videos that I recorded back in several years, 2021, it's about 3 years ago now, actually, exactly, that I started recording these videos. And I don't know particularly why I felt the gravitation. It was just a thought that came into my experience relatively randomly to go back and listen to some of them. And in starting to listen to them, I realized that I felt something deeper that I couldn't quite cognitively put my finger on, but I felt it in the energy, and it was drawing my attention more so than anything else that I was experiencing at the time. And so I felt as though I really couldn't shake it. I couldn't shake this experience of reflecting on these older videos that I recorded, and quite honestly don't even consciously recall why at the time I was recording those videos, except perhaps to document what was appearing to happen. And this was also at a point in time where I had only recently, and by recently I mean several months, um, that was really the beginning of the conscious intention of self-reflecting on the patterns that I tend to exhibit and or tend to follow, and the patterns in myself, patterns of behavior, patterns of thought, and really conducting deep dives into tools that help frame those patterns in a way that perhaps I wasn't familiar with, and could help point out aspects of myself that would just give a bit more context to what felt to me at the time like a significant foundational shift in how I was relating to reality. And the tools at the time largely were astrology and the Enneagram and a lot of quantum mechanics and just seeing how everything sort of mirrored each other, and there were commonalities that when I related to them personally and saw them being expressed in my own experience, that newly discovered sort of framework to articulate my experience and ground in my experience really also shifted how I then related to the experiences that I was having, whether it be experiences with employment, experiences with family, experiences with money, experiences with friends. I mean, but most predominantly the experiences with myself and the relationship developing with myself on a much deeper, more expanded way. And so, a very long-winded way of basic, a long-winded way of giving context to what was happening, what was appearing to happen, not the whole picture, but what was appearing to happen at the time. I really began recording myself expressing, and it feels like yesterday in watching these videos. It's remarkable. And when I watched this video for the first time in a while, and I felt that I started to feel this really profoundly deep energy, I didn't relate to it in the way that I'm relating to it right now as I'm sitting here expressing this. It feels different to me because I'm feeling the emotionality that I felt at the time of this video, which I wasn't feeling yesterday. I wasn't feeling the emotionality of it. I more so was feeling objectively impersonal in relationship to it, as though I was watching the experience of someone else. And now I was just sitting here realizing the emotion that I felt and how correlated this emotion is to the emotions I was experiencing in this first video that I recorded. And even though it's neither the sort of exact or even similar experience that I'm having now, nor do I have the same perspective that I do of the experience now. And yet, even still, I feel the emotions that I felt. They're much more subtle. They are so subtly felt. It's just this almost underlying tone in everything that's going on right now, whether I'm checking my emails, making lunch for myself, taking a shower, riding the bike, petting the cats. It's like there's this underlying energy that is mirroring that energy from 3 years ago in this first video. And I just wonder, is this, now I say remnant energy, but it's not as though it's, being eradicated from my experience in totality. But I just kind of wonder, is this remnant emotional energy that is coming up to the surface from a really, really, really deep place, simply to be expressed, to be witnessed, to be acknowledged? It feels like it really wants to be soothed. It wants to be soothed. It wants to be comforted. It wants to be taken care of and held. And so what I can offer it is to do just that. And doing just that is me simply giving it space to express, to be felt, without resisting it, without rejecting it, just allowing it to be how it feels. And so, taking a deep breath, because this energy of distraught, deeply distraught, is not easy, so to speak, to sit in, but it feels meaningful for me to do so. And so I am going to both sit in what I feel now and sit in what I felt then and allow that release almost in what kind of feels like a little bit of a bookend, which is kind of interesting because of what I've been contemplating around segments and that segmented perception or interpretive lens that tends to bookend segments of text or history, whatever is being interpreted. It's that sort of like book-ended, totality, sort of complete picture segment of a picture. So it's kind of interesting to use it in that way. But yeah, so okay, let's do the thing. By the way, this video I recorded on my phone in the dark at night, I believe it was. I'm sitting here in the dark, crying. I didn't get a job that I was extremely hopeful about, and actually felt in my bones like it was meant for me because I don't have the experience in certain computer apps that I guess are absolutely necessary for the job. I'm honestly not really surprised. In this day and age, that seems to be the absolute most important thing that any person can possibly have, is some sort of experience or want to learn anything about apps and have an interest in it. And that's just not who I am. I don't give a fucking shit about goddamn apps. And maybe I'm just too quote unquote old school for that. It's not ever anything I've been interested in. Maybe video games I was interested in as a kid. I'm recording myself right now, I suppose, on something that could be considered an app. But it's just unfortunate that I feel like I've always sort of been born into the wrong time period. I've always just more appreciated older items. They're built better, and it just is less risk for privacy infringement and getting obsessed over material things that, in the grand scheme of life, don't matter. And it's just sad to me, and it's sad for me. And so now I'm talking about it to no one except myself at the moment, and hoping that it alleviates some of my just utter feelings of distraught and distress and frustration and sadness and worry and depression and uncertainty in where my life is going and what's going to happen, because I'm absolutely, utterly miserable in my current job. It is so toxic to my emotional state that I just worry for my own sanity. I'm not suicidal, but I just don't, I'm hanging on by a thread emotionally there. And to not have any sort of idea or clue as to how long it's going to go on for is frightening. Yeah, so that's what I have. It's quite a distracting energy. It's quite all-consuming. It feels very tiring. So it's like, as much as I understand it and desire to integrate it within the wholeness of being, I don't intend to be consumed by it. In a way, it almost feels as though I'm swimming in this ocean. I am within the ocean of distress. It feels like it is all around me. And that's okay. That's okay. It's okay. I am grateful to notice it. And in that, let it go. Let it, at least that's the intention, is to let it go. Is to let it exist. Let it be present within the experience, but to also not necessarily identify with it as though I am distressed, because that doesn't feel like the experience. It doesn't feel like that is correct to me. I don't feel that. I just feel the energy of it in my surrounding, in the environment. Which is a bit of a contrast with this particular moment of my sort of personal experience, where I was feeling this distress regardless of the circumstance. I was feeling distress, and that distress is really largely what was speaking out. It was really speaking and being filtered through this sort of experience of being in distress. And so even though I can feel and relate to that energy currently, I don't feel like that is the lens through which I'm perceiving this experience now. Like, oof. Oof. Ooh. Yeah. Also kind of realizing that in this feeling, in this energy of distress, which I sort of reawoke within myself yesterday, because I wasn't really feeling it prior to that point. And I couldn't quite put my finger on what I was feeling yesterday. I wouldn't have said distress. I just felt this looming background energy of heaviness. And so now, in correlating it with this distress that I was experiencing 3 years ago in this recording, which I have experienced it more than just as expressed in this video, but in feeling this distress throughout other recordings that I've done yesterday and today, beyond just anything about these past video reflections, it almost feels, it has felt to me as though there is this meaninglessness, as though nothing that I am recording has felt meaningful. And so I keep having this voice come out that's like, no, I'm just going to get rid of this. This doesn't feel meaningful. This feels really just like, I just don't know what I'm really doing. And so I'm just sitting here kind of realizing that when in distress, and the example that came to mind when I was thinking about this was a horse in distress. And I got this visual in my mind's eye of this distressed horse laying on the ground, injured. And it just sort of was coming through as, when in distress, nothing else matters, nothing else feels meaningful beyond that very contracted, narrowly perceived experience. Nothing outside of it feels relevant. It just doesn't feel like there is substance in it that has any meaning to that which is being experienced, because that which is being experienced is the only thing that matters, is the only thing that is the only thing that is consuming attention, consuming focus. And that's, in a way, what I'm kind of experiencing in this distressed energy, is that it's almost as though in this distressed energy, nothing is meaningful, and that everything is meaningless. And that's not in the sense of non-dualistic, there is no meaning. It's more in the sense of, I cannot focus on anything else except this pain and suffering. It is so present within my experience, it is so all-consuming within my experience, that even attempting to shift focus doesn't shake off this all-consuming energy. And it's like it's magnetic, even if I don't want to be magnetized to it. So I don't know what's coming out of this. There's a part of me that really wants to just trust, and trust that there is something meaningful here. And I guess in that I question why does there have to be something meaningful in it at all? Why do I have to either label it as meaningful? Why do I have to believe that it's meaningful? Why do I even have to question whether it is or isn't meaningful? And this is something that I was thinking about an hour or two ago, right before I was going to ride the bike, and it was just coming through as this confusion around whether something has meaning or not, whether something feels meaningful or not. And quite honestly, in that moment, at that time, I sort of was saying to myself, well, I'm sort of feeling like this is even perhaps transcending any need, so to speak, for meaning in the way that at least I have perceived meaning to be in my reality, the relationship that I have with meaning. And at that moment, it just felt as though the relationship that I had with meaning was so confused that, yes, I could say it was meaningless, but that it just was what it was. That it was okay, even if I wasn't perceiving meaning in my experience, and that, or that I was perceiving meaning in my experience, but couldn't even put my finger on articulating the exact meaning that I was experiencing. And so it just was this like, it kind of feels like this is the edge of meaning, but I'm not really quite sure how to relate to that other than just to let it be and feel the weirdness in it. So I don't know what's happening. I'm just sort of going with it and allowing myself to feel vulnerable in that confusion slash edge, perhaps. But just that it's okay that it's confused. It's okay that it's fuzzy. It's okay that it's unclear. it's okay whether meaning wants to exist in my reality or not. And I can still feel like reality is that there is something bigger to reality, that there is something bigger than I can possibly fathom comprehending. And that's maybe meaning is not quite the correct descriptor. Perhaps it's not feeling accurate in my experience anymore, and it's not so much about meaning per se and my relationship to what everything means or doesn't mean. Um, More so, perhaps, that it's trust. Um, but almost that I don't, it goes back to the need, that I don't feel like I need meaning in a way that I rely on it for how I identify, so to speak, how I relate to reality at all. That the relationship is not founded on need. Perhaps that doesn't mean that the relationship doesn't exist, and that meaning still, I do still have a relationship with meaning. That meaning does still exist in my reality. It's just that my relationship to it is shifting in a way that is not about need. Perhaps it's more about partnership with meaning, partnership in a sense of treatment, how I treat meaning and how meaning treats me, how we relate to one another, how we feel in each other's presence. And I know that describing it in this way sounds a bit odd, um, but it helps me feel a bit more intimately connected to concepts where I haven't felt intimately connected before. I've had similar experiences with my relationship with money. Um, there's another one, but I can't recall it at this moment. Um, but it's interesting to think about relating to meaning in a way that is reciprocal and equitable, and where I treat meaning with a genuine sense of care. Like I genuinely care about how I treat you, and I care about you. To care about meaning. Appreciating you, showing up for you, listening to you. Mm. 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 Okay. Do you know what I mean? Do you know it? Alright. Let's... Ironically, this would actually be really helpful with graphs. I'm having a hard time visualizing what they're talking about. I wonder if inherently random is somewhat synonymous with this sort of transcendent meaning. Where it's only random, where its meaning is in question. This noisy channel kind of reminds me of the that distress that I was talking about. Combinatorics? Combinatorics. I don't think I've ever seen that word. Combinatorics, the study of counting methods. I love that. At the precise moment when a random system seems most chaotic, exquisite geometric order peers through. Oh, I feel emotion in that. Wow. It's almost this emotion of beauty, if I can say that's even an emotion. This just reverence, this... Oh, it's just beautiful. Mathematicians used a probabilistic method to prove that there are infinitely many configurations known as subspace designs. Objects related to error correcting codes, whose existence is not at all obvious, as one mathematician told me. Yeah, subspace is like the subtle realm. I mean, I suppose the mental body would compute incorrectness, so to speak, compute errors in relating to a subspace, a subtle realm that it doesn't understand, that is beyond its patterned operating system. It just feels... it feels enough. Okay, I'm playing around with cameras, so I'm not quite sure how the sound quality is going to be on this, but we're just going with it. Anyway, I was just sitting here with my morning coffee and really feeling into this energy that I've been feeling since the last video. And the energy that I'm talking about now is inclusive of the energy that I was talking about in the prior segment about distress. And this morning when I woke up, I continued feeling it. And the imagery that came to me, or the analogy, was almost like this artist who is a painter, and they've been working on this painting for some time, and they're getting really frustrated with it. Now, the particular reasons why they're frustrated, I'm setting that aside, but it's that moment where the artist just takes their painting in frustration and is like, this is pure shit. This is just shit. And they take it and they either paint all over it, and or they take it and they smash it into a million pieces and burn it. And so I was having this imagery come through, and I was like, yeah, that's kind of what this feels like. Is not a blockage like I have felt before. It's not that blockage where it feels like this energetic wall that I can't penetrate through. This has felt more like that almost tortured artist feeling. And so I don't know how I necessarily relate to that in this context, except that I'm feeling that energy, regardless of whether I label myself, identify as an artist. That's the analogy that has come through, probably because that's just what the mental body here sort of associates, connects with that particular feeling. Whether in people I have met over time who have described similar experiences, or even in films that I've seen and they depict scenes of that nature. And so that's what there is, that's how the mental body here connects with this energy. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I have to identify with it and say that is me, that is who I am in this moment, is a tortured artist. That's not what I'm intending to say, nor is it what I feel about this experience. It just happens to be the energy that is current. And so this morning, as I was drinking my coffee, I was contemplating and just sitting in this energy some more, and really just having conversation with myself about what the experience is like, because I don't recall a time where it has felt so prevalent, so predominant. And to a degree, I hesitate to use the word overwhelming. It's just been very pervasive. It's been there in the background. And so in talking about it with myself this morning, I sort of started to realize that there is perhaps a connection here, because it really began, so to speak, since I've been really diving into meaning and to some semblance value and utility and productivity, and how I relate to these concepts and how these concepts show up in my experience and just in how I observe reality. And as I was sitting here contemplating these four sort of aspects of the human experience, I got another analogy of tilling the soil. And I was visiting with my parents this past weekend, and they have recently, over the years, began a garden in their yard. Now, my dad has gardened before, but this is a different experience for them. And so, without going too far into detail, I've said to them over the years, it feels to me like perhaps this soil needs to really be nurtured and sort of recultivated, if you will, like really dug up. There's a lot of rocks in the soil, and there's a lot of roots from plantings over the years, and it just kind of feels to me like there's this noise in the soil really competing for space, so to speak, with the new seedlings that they try to plant every year. And whether there's accuracy in that or not is not really what I'm pointing toward. It's more this analogy came to me this morning. What I had said to them just kind of came through in this context around these 4 concepts, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe there's something here about not even tilling the soil, but really, really reworking it, really digging very deeply down into it, and untangling came through to, sort of untangle these concepts, because they feel like, in our experience, they have been so knotted together that just contemplating meaning, just processing meaning, processing utility, almost as separate, mutually exclusive concepts and experiences, hasn't really felt, or doesn't feel currently, I suppose, wholly adequate. And so I was just sitting here contemplating this and just kind of starting to see a little bit of a bigger picture for something that over these past several days has felt really, really, really clunky. And I recognize that a lot of contemplative processing can be clunky. It can be very clunky. It can be very gradual. It can be, to the mental body, very nonsensical, but it feels correct, so to speak, in the body. And so that's a lot of the enjoyment that I have experienced over the time that I have been so contemplative. So feels weird to say contemplative, because it feels like it means something totally different than what I'm intending it to mean. But anyway, so yeah, really really interesting to think about what potential lies under the surface of a very sort of interwoven landscape of utility, productivity, meaning, and value, where the relationship to each and to the whole is one of deep listening and, for lack of a better phrase, alignment with a sense of integrity that holds safe and secure and trusting space within oneself, knowing that one's productivity, one's value, one's meaning, one's utility is so far beyond what the experience of those concepts has been. And so I suppose that's kind of where I am at the moment with that. So I'm very curious to see how this continues to unfold. Yep, so I'm going to continue with the morning coffee, which may or may not be cold by this point, but that's okay. Oh, I didn't stop it. Here we are. Hi. Oh, because I'm pressing the wrong button. LOL.